Hey guys, so this video I'm just going to talk and tell you guys obviously about Lincoln's birth just because I can't figure out a way to make his video the way that I want it to be. And I just got back from a walk outside where it's really cold and Lincoln is asleep in his car seat and I don't want him to wake up because I have been trying to get this video done all day long, and this was the only way that I could get him to fall asleep. So hopefully he doesn't wake up. October 16th was my last doctor's appointment, and when I went in, she checked me and I was about 1.5 centimeters dilated. So we went home and just kind of got everything ready and just went about our day. Maybe we tried to possibly get me to dilate more by the time we had to go to the hospital, which was, we had to check in at 7:30 in the morning. So we wake up at 6 on October 17th, obviously. And we wake up at 6, we get dressed, get everything ready, and then we went to IHOP because I wanted to eat a pretty decent meal before I went into the hospital. So we went and ate IHOP, met my mom there, and we left there at about 7:15, and the hospital was right down the street. So we finished there, went and got to the hospital. We checked into labor and delivery, and then once we got checked in, they went ahead and sent us to our room that I had him in. Once I got all checked in and got undressed and got in bed and everything like that, it was about 8 o'clock, and at that time they went and started to put my IVs in me and get everything hooked up to me. My doctor went ahead and put me on Pitocin instead of Cervidil because my cervix had already dilated. They just put me on Pitocin instead. When my nurse went to put the IV, the butterfly IV in my hand, she first started on my right side, and my right hand is my dominant hand, and anytime I get pricked, may it be in my arm or my hand or wherever with a needle, this side of me bleeds so much. I have bled through chairs that have little gaps in them. I've bled all over my hospital bed. I bleed a lot. So I told her that. I was like, I bleed a lot on this side. And she's like, okay, I know redheads do tend to be a little bit more bloody than others, but it's okay. And I was like, okay, I'm just telling you. Fair warning. So she goes ahead and pricks my hand, and she's just like, oh. And I was like, what? And she's like, you are a bleeder. And she didn't even get me in my vein, I don't think. But I was bleeding so much that she just didn't put the IV in there. She couldn't, because she couldn't stop the bleeding enough to be able to concentrate in getting the IV in. So she didn't put an IV in on that side. So she put it in on my left hand, and that one was, I hardly even bled. But so once she got the IV in, she went ahead and started me on Pitocin, and that was about 9 o'clock in the morning. So everything pretty much started happening at 9 o'clock. So some time passed, and I had asked them if I could record in the hospital, even just during the day, and especially once it was time for Lincoln to be born. And she said that really the only time I could record was after Lincoln was born. Like, once he came out, then I could record. But if something were to have gone wrong after he was born, then I couldn't I had to stop recording. That was kind of just like a real bummer to me because, you know, I see all these videos of birth vlogs and, you know, people are able to record their whole experience, and I was just really sad that I couldn't record the whole experience. So anyways, so then I don't know roughly what time it was, but some time had passed and I was starting to get hungry, and by that point I wasn't dilated enough to be on a clear liquid diet yet. I was still on a liquid diet but not clear yet. So my nurse went ahead and got me some Jello, which was really nice because I was starting to get a headache because my blood sugar was low. And yeah, I had my Jello and just was pretty much on my phone the rest of the time we'd eat. I don't even think we turned the TV on until after Lincoln was born. Around, I want to say, 2 o'clock is when they checked me, and I had to be, I think, either 4 or 5 centimeters dilated before I could get my epidural. The contractions I was having up until that point weren't too bad, but I could tell they were going to start getting to a point that I wasn't going to be able to handle. So I went ahead and told her that I wanted to have my epidural. So the guy who put in my epidural came in. It was so strange because probably 10 minutes before he came in, my contractions picked up, and I was right. They had gotten to a point where I couldn't really handle it. While he was getting everything ready, I was going through these contractions that were not very pleasant. And so then I got to a point where I was able to be still enough. Sorry, I had to get Lincoln out because he was just grunting and was just getting too noisy. Anyways, so they put the epidural in, and it was so funny because I had to sit on the edge of the bed, and when he was putting the numbing medicine in, after that I started to feel like I was going to fall off the edge of the bed, and I could see that I wasn't, but it was just so weird. I was like, I feel like I'm gonna fall off the edge of the bed, and Dallas and my nurse were like, no, you're definitely not, and even if you were on the very edge, we got you, don't worry. So that was a little strange. Finally got the epidural in. It took a couple of minutes for it to kind of really start to kick in, but once it did, it was easy peasy lemon squeezy up until the point where I needed another dose of an epidural. Because I don't know why I needed another dose with Lincoln. I didn't need 2 doses plus little bumps here and there with Easton. I had 1 epidural and that was it. But with Lincoln, I needed 2 doses, and then they had the coolest thing available to me is like a little button, kind of like where you can bump yourself some extra pain medicine like morphine and whatever when you have a surgery. I was able to bump myself a couple little doses of my epidural if I needed it, which really came in handy. I got my second epidural, and then at some point my nurse, she checked me just to see how far along I was. When she checked me, it felt like she broke my water because I could feel something coming out, but I didn't know what it was. All I could tell was that it felt warm and it was some sort of liquid. Okay, so when she checked me, I was like, I think my water just broke. And she was like, okay, well, let me check. And she like lifted up the blankets and she was just kind of standing there staring. And I was like, did my water break? And she was like, I don't know, let me see. Like, she was already looking, so I don't know what she didn't know. I don't know what she was thinking. But then she was like, no, I don't think that was your water that broke. I think it's your mucus plug that's coming out. And then, like, TMI moment, she like was pulling on it and she's like, see, here's your mucus plug. And I was just like, oh my goodness. Thankfully nobody else was in the room, because I think everybody would have gotten super disgusted, because I myself got grossed out. And I know if Dallas would have been in the room, he probably would have thrown up, because he doesn't deal well with stuff like that. So anyways, so she was like, no, your water didn't break. It's just your mucus plug. And I was like, oh, okay. And at some point, the nurse wanted me to have Lincoln on 10/17/17 at 17:17, which is military time for 5:17 in the afternoon. At some point before then, I threw up. So I was like, okay, well, now that I've thrown up, more than likely this means that I am ready to push, because that's what happened with my daughter. My nurse checked me, and by that point, I was, I think, 8 centimeters dilated. Obviously, I wasn't ready. I had 2 more centimeters to go. And then a little bit of time had passed, and she checked me again, and I was still at an 8. And then I started to feel sick again, and I told her, I was like, I'm going to throw up. And so she got the little throw up pan, and I threw up. And this time I threw up like 3 times. I think it's because I had more doses of epidural than I had with Easton. Because with Easton, like I said, I only had 1 dose. With Lincoln, I had 2 doses plus however many little bumps I had given myself. So after I was done throwing up, my nurse checked me again, and I had instantaneously went from 8 to 10 centimeters. And at that point, she said, okay, you're ready to start pushing, and so we're going to do a couple practice pushes and see how good you are. And that's when I told her, I was like, okay, well, with my daughter, I only did like 2 practice pushes, and then they were like, okay, we're going to call your doctor because you push really good. So just letting you know. So we went ahead and started pushing, and I think he was a little bit further up more than Easton was, because it took a little bit more pushing, actually a lot more pushing than it did with Easton. With him, I probably pushed for a good 10-15 minutes, and with Easton, it took 3 pushes and she was out. So I was pushing and pushing and pushing, and then I realized that the light fixture that was above me, the glass that was over the lights, when the lights were turned off, acted as a mirror. So I could actually see Lincoln being born, because the mirror that was in front of me was just a little bit too high, so I couldn't see in that. But I was happy I was able to see in the light fixture. When I realized that I was actually able to see him being born, it kind of freaked me out, and I think that's why it might have taken me a little bit longer to push with him, because then I was just like, I'm not ready for him to be out yet. I don't want him to be out yet. And I was also afraid of the possible pain, or maybe even thinking that I was going to feel pain now that I could see him being born, because with Easton I didn't see. I couldn't see anything. So I was pushing and pushing, and I was trying to look up at the light or the glass while I was pushing, but I was pushing so hard that I seriously felt like my eyeballs were going to pop out of my head when I looked up at the glass. So I didn't look up at it for very long. Then the doctor came in. That was at the point where he was crowning and was ready to come into this world. So I pushed like 3 more times and he was out. But the first push, when I had stopped pushing, I looked up and I saw his head. Like, it hadn't popped out yet, but it was just like right there. And at that point, it was like my body just kind of took over and did its own thing. They were telling me to push and I was listening to them, but when I wanted to stop pushing in my brain, my body was just like, no, keep pushing, get him out of there type of thing. Because it didn't stop pushing, and so I was just kind of letting my body do its own thing and look up at the light fixture as well. And I saw his head pop out, and then just the rest of him came out, and my doctor asked if I wanted to help pull him out, and I was a little scared at first because I didn't want to drop him, but so I kind of just grabbed him and pulled him out a little bit, and there he was. And at that point, so during the time I was pushing, I kept telling my mom and Dallas to not cry because they were going to make me cry, and that was just going to make the whole process even harder. Right after he was born, I started crying. I was just like, he's so cute, and yada yada yada, and my mom's like, yeah, and he's yours, and you get to keep him, and we get to bring him home, and it was great. So after he was born, and I had to have an episiotomy, as a redhead, obviously, I was bleeding. Any woman does after they have a baby, obviously. But I guess I had bled. They couldn't stop my bleeding, and I was bleeding a lot. And so they had to get Cytotec and give me a few whatevers of that. And my nurse had to push on my uterus to essentially stop it from bleeding, because I think they were expecting me to go into shock, because I had lost, once they had weighed it all and I had stopped bleeding, they had weighed and measured that I had lost 900 mLs of blood. And if you don't know how much that is, it's a lot, but there is usually a big water jug that you get at the hospital that they'll usually put ice water in, and it has the numbers of mLs that that jug is, and I bled as much as the jug held, because I asked my doctor, I was like, so how much did I bleed? And she said, you bled a lot. You bled 900 milliliters. And I was like, how much is that? And she picked up my cup and she's like, this much. And I was like, oh, okay. She's like, yeah, you bled a lot. And so that was a little interesting. And it was kind of funny because then I became known in the labor and delivery ward as the 900 girl, because when nurses came in, they were like, oh, did you bleed a lot? And I was like, yeah, I guess I bled 900 milliliters. They're like, oh, that's who you are. Or, oh, you're the one who bled that much. And I was just like, great. So, yeah, that was pretty funny. But afterwards, it was great. He was absolutely perfect. And I couldn't have asked for a healthier baby. They did have to give him a little bit of oxygen, but nothing to where they had to like rush him to the NICU or anything like that. They just had to get some air into his lungs to help him breathe, and also once they got all the fluid out of him, that helped him as well. So, but other than that, he was perfectly healthy, and definitely let everybody know that he had arrived. He was screaming mad. He was not happy. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. So, and it really meant a lot to me that my OB was the same OB that went pretty much through my whole pregnancy with Easton and my whole pregnancy with Lincoln and delivered both of them, and she was just absolutely amazing. She was so great, and the staff there were absolutely amazing, and I was really happy and thankful that I was able to enjoy this whole experience. Yeah, but that is it, and what I'll go ahead and do is just insert the clip that I do have of him after he was born, and so at least you guys can see that part, and then I'll put in like a couple pictures that we took of him after he was born and stuff like that. So at least you guys can see that stuff. But yeah, that is my labor and delivery story of how Mr. Little Lincoln here came into this world and blessed my life and so many others, huh? Yeah. Yeah. So, alrighty guys, well I hope you enjoyed, and we will see you next time. Bye. Bye.
I was thinking like 5 to 17 in the afternoon. That wasn't quite what we did. Is it 10:30 and 4:30?
6:05.
10:30 and 4. Is it 10:30 and 4 or 10:30 and 4:30?
It's 10:30 and 16.
For
What are you thinking, babe?
I think it is.
I think it is.
So handsome.
Oh, PKU? I thought it was 10:30, 4:30. Yeah, wasn't there 22:32?
I think it's
Dad, you want to cut the cord?
okay.
Yes, everything.
Okay, wait, I'm
And
gonna
thank you very much.
clamp it and
positive.
find a place here. And I'll give you a pair
Good
of
job.
scissors here.
She never had a
Do you want a picture of cutting? Because I can
Everything is good.
make it. Oh,
So,
I can make it so you're not seeing anything here. And there you go. So
I'm not 100% that I'm actually getting anything good here, but
yeah, it's like gnawing through rubber bands, isn't it? There we go.
Okay.
It's strong.
So now let's get him skin to skin. Did you want him skin to skin?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, pretty good. I think.
He's mad.
I'm not going to get much more.
What's that stuff? O positive.
You want that one there?
Thanks.
No, I think we're all right there.
coverage to the video.
I'm sorry.
I'm doing, just doing a little coverage. Yeah, I'm making sure.
I just have patience.
There's a little bit of the head. You can see a little more. There's no
Look at
ear.
that hair.
Bitty Rachel ears.
84 and no gases. Thank you though.
On and check his oxygen level.
I'm just putting my elbow on your shoulder.
Okay.
All right, placenta's out.
Right now. 4:15. Okay.
Does it say 4?
Yeah. We're not quite there yet.
Okay. Okay.
Can you give me some Pitocin and some
I'm
uterine
gonna get my
massage?
phone.
Okay. I'll do uterus. You do the Pitocin. Gonna just rub on your tummy. And I've got some Cytotec in the room.
Yeah, we're gonna give her 600 oral.
I've got Cytotec right behind you, and it's on the whiteboard.
We're just gonna give you something in the.
She wants 600. 600 oral? Did you say oral?
Yeah.
Okay, now I can feel your hands. Okay.
So I'm going to take him here. His oxygen level is a little bit low. And just give him a little bit of extra help, okay?
Yeah, you're helping.
Yeah, there we go.
Borrow in here.
It's one big pressure.
Some water.